Kids, you're dismissed. Get some good snacks. For the rest of us, we will be in Matthew 5 again this morning. Jesus' sermon on the Mount. There's notes there on the back of your bulletin for you and some questions for when we are finished. But we're going to look at verses 13 through 20 this morning, Matthew 5. Verses 13 and through 20. And of course, they'll be there on the screen for you as well. But I read, as I was preparing this last week, I read an interesting story. If you will, I will describe this story as I read it this past week. It talked about a quiet, and maybe you've heard this as well, but it talked about a quiet forest dweller that lived high in the Austrian village near the Alps. And he lived there alone. He was an older gentleman, a retired gentleman, and the town decided to hire him to clear a debris field and to keep the creek and spring and all those things clear, because that spring would run into the lower village. So they hired him to keep that all clean, and he just did it. They never really saw him. They sent him a check every once in a while, and everything was good. Well, a few years go by, and a few months, and on and on and on, and this town council gets together, and they look at this payment, and they're trying to cut corners and save some money, and they're saying, why do we keep paying this random guy that we never see, and all the water's clean? You see, they've gotten used to everything being okay. And they're wondering, why do we keep paying this guy? So the story goes on that they talked about it, and they kept wondering why they do it, and no one seems to really know why, because the council had turnover, and they decide, well, we're going to stop paying. We're going to quit paying this guy for what he's doing, because we're good. We don't need that service anymore. Well, a few months go by, about a year goes by, and all of a sudden, this spring is not as clean as it once was. All of a sudden, this town's river system was not as clean. There's field and trees and different things blocking the river that had provided different things for them. And soon enough, the city, the council there realized, we made a mistake. We didn't realize how influential this guy's work could be, so they hired him back, and the wheels started to turn again, and the river cleaned up. Well, I read that this last week as I was thinking about our passage this morning, because many times, as Christians, our influence is often unseen. Our influence on others is not really seen as necessarily a good thing. And I think that as we come to a more and more anti-Christian, anti-God worldview in our society, the need for Christians is only going to increase as we strive to make an impact on this world. And I think even more so, we're seeing that right now in our culture, right now as we look and turn on the news, which I don't recommend, but if you do, you'll see the need for more Christian influence on the society around us. Well, my goal this morning is to tell you, to describe to you, for you to see what Jesus is going to say, how we can have that influence here in Matthew 5, to be salt and light to this world. What does that look like? And I believe it's at the basic of our faith. So let's dive into it. Look at verse 13. We're going to break these down and look what Jesus is trying to tell his disciples, which we'd be included in that as well. So verse 13, be salt for Jesus. Here's what it says. Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. So, basic Christian living looks like salt. Now, let's get into that a little more. So, let's think about salt for just a minute. What's its purpose? Why do we use salt? Well, one reason we use salt is as a preservative, right? We want to keep food good. We want to preserve that food. Another reason we might use salt is to flavor our dishes, right? We want it to taste a little more salty than what it might be. We all tend to like that taste. Now, salt was also, in this particular culture, this Middle Eastern culture, was often used as an antiseptic as well. When a new baby would be born, they would cover it in salt to try and get rid of any cuts or bruises. They wanted to get rid of those things quickly, so they would use salt to do that. Now, another reason we use salt is it makes us thirsty, right? Wally, when he brings us a bag of popcorn, what do you immediately want right after? You really want something to drink because it's salty, right? We want that quenching of our thirst. Salty things make you thirsty. Now, there's also a cultural significance here. If you can remember this Middle Eastern context we were in, you think about the Dead Sea, and what do we know about the Dead Sea? It's covered with this saltiness deposits on top of it, and in that culture, they would often use the Dead Sea, and we see it other times as well, as a description or as a picture to compare things to. And as you know, the Dead Sea is contaminated with different minerals, and that salt has lost its original effectiveness. It's not like the salt of the sea, if you will. It's lost its purpose. Well, pure salt can't lose its effectiveness. Pure salt can't. Jesus wants us to be like pure salt to our culture around us. We are to hinder the world's corruption around us. We stand in the gap, if you will, from the all-out downward slide, downward spiral of our culture. Christians are to stand in that gap and not let that happen. Now, ultimately, we know it's up to God, but He has given us that responsibility to be that salt. Now, I thought about this a few Sundays ago. We had the baccalaureate service. Perry was there with me. And it's just neat. I didn't have one when I graduated, so it's neat to see in a culture and even in a context where more things are going anti-church, anti-Christian, anti-God, anti-God's church. We have an opportunity to be salt. It was a neat opportunity for us to gather together and speak some truths into these young people's lives as they get ready to graduate and enter this world. So what do? Libby's going to throw up a few things, 4 things, that I read this past week from John Stott. He's a popular theologian who has written a lot on this subject. The first thing he says to do is you consider to be salt in this world. Remember this. There is power in prayer. There is power in prayer that daily, we should not neglect daily to take our things to God, to take our requests, to take our needs, to take our thanksgivings to God. We must remember there is power in prayer. We'll see that here in a few weeks when Jesus talks about it. Second, there is power of truth or in truth. Don't forget the power of the gospel. See, the gospel changes lives. Don't forget there is power in this book, in the message it speaks. The gospel is true and is what the world really needs. And we are the salt that must take that gospel to this lost world. Third, there is power of example. He says, John Stott, he says that truth is powerful when it's argued. It's even more powerful when it's exhibited. See, we can speak the truth. We can say all these things. But if our lives don't match up with what we're saying, what are we? We're hypocrites, right? There's more power when we live out what we are communicating, what we are telling other people. The saltiness is even more powerful when it's used, not just sitting on a shelf, right? We must have this gospel message and take it to those in need of it. And then fourth, there's power in group solidarity. Don't underestimate the power of a local church. Now, churches come, churches go, but we have the universal church as a whole. But even here in Newman, we have a body of believers that God has called us to be the salt to our community. Now, that impacts our day-to-day lives. And I ask you, I spoke about the news just a few minutes ago. Do you want to see changes happen in our nation? I think we'd all say yes. Do we want to see changes in our culture that's happening around us? I think we'd all say yes. Well, that begins by being salt in our local communities. By being salt. You see, Jesus, as he's talking here to his disciples, he knew they're going to go back to their jobs. They're going to go back to that local community that they were in. And he's telling them, be salt in those communities. Be salt to those people. And remember, you are not alone in this fight. You are not alone when you stand in the gap. God will be with you. And he promises that he will not leave us. He will give us the strength to be the salt to make an impact on others that he calls us to. Next, not just salt, but we are to be light for Jesus. Verses 14 through 16. Verse 14. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. All right, Christians are not just supposed to be salt, but we're supposed to be light to the world. It's more than just that cultural impact, that's standing in the gap, but we are actually supposed to be light to this world as well. So what does that all mean? What is the purpose of light? And as you know, and according to the dictionary, light is a source of illumination. We like light, don't we? When it's really dark out, we want some light. When the kids go in the basement during youth group at night, it's really dark down there. They like a little light to be on down there. But what makes the darkness go away? It's that light that pierces through. Even the smallest of lights will pierce through that darkness. The light always pierces through. It reveals what is hidden by the dark. It wakes us up in the morning, right? When you see that light starting to shine in, it wakes you up. It makes you want to get ready. It warns us of potential danger. When we see, hopefully not too many red and blue lights flashing, it warns us that there may be danger, or we might be getting pulled over, or whatever it may be, right? When we see orange lights, those hazard lights, it warns us that there may be potential danger. There's something we need to watch out for ahead. Light is important to our daily lives. Now, culturally speaking, verse 15 makes the point that people don't put the light under a basket, but they put it on a stand. Now, just reading this, we wouldn't see the cultural significance that this would have had to his listeners, Jesus' listeners. See, what they would do in their house, they would have a very small lamp at night, and they would put it up on a stand so it would have the maximum effectiveness. It would light up the whole room that they could gather around and do what they needed to do at night. For us, we just turn on the light switch and everything comes on. But when was the last time all your lights were out? You had to get a little lamp or a candle, or we have multiple flashlights that start waving around the house when the kids start running. And, you know, we get those little flashlights, and what do? They light up huge areas for us, right? We want that little small light that will light up a huge area. And for us, as we read this, Christians are supposed to be like that lamp on a stand. Yes, we may be small. Yes, we may not have as big of an impact as what we think we should. But even the smallest impact can light up a huge area, can have a huge impact on the culture and community around us. See, we have the weapon that Christ has given us, the Scriptures, to take to others. This is what we take as a lamp, as a light to others. We want them to see the good news that is in these scriptures. We want them to read and see that it doesn't have to be dark. It doesn't have to. You don't have to stay in that darkness. There's hope. There's light. And as we read this, we must say and be reminded that we have the opportunity, by the power of God, to take this small little light that is us and impact others around us. I was reminded as I read this, Christmas tends to be one of my favorite times of year. You know, June and July, we have a lot of birthdays this time of year with the family, and it feels like Christmas in July. It really is. It feels like Christmas in July with all the gifts we have to get. And I was thinking about Christmas and going down that line, and Zachary will be one here soon in a month. And as I began thinking about that, it reminded me of Christmas time and our Christmas Eve service. And one of the things that we do is at the end, we take candles, and I will light the first one, and then everyone will take their candle, and the next person will light the next one, and the next will light the next one, and then we all sing Silent Night together. And the fascinating part is that when just one candle is lit, I mean, it's bright, but it's not super bright, right? But when all those candles light up, it glows the whole room. And I thought about that this week as I was thinking about this passage, because, yes, you are one of those candles. But when I'm on board, and then you're on board, and then you're on board, and then you're on board, just think about how big that light can grow in the middle of this dark community, in the middle of this dark world. People need Jesus. And we have the light. We can be the light that they need. So, don't be discouraged. Be encouraged by these two truths. For those who are in the light, they should walk in the light. 1 John 5:1-5-7. Olivia will throw it up there for you. This is the message we have heard from him and proclaim to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. Walk in the light. Be the light. See, Jesus desires of us to spread that good news to those who need it. And the encouraging part is, as you'll find, is as you walk in the light, and as someone else that you see beside you say, walking in the light as well, it encourages you to keep going. You want to keep going. And you want to do this mission for God together. Second, those who are in the light do good works to others. 1 Peter 2:12. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. You see, our good works speak to the goodness of God to those around us. See, our good works is that first avenue often that we have to spread this light to others. We want to do good to our neighbor. We want to do good and represent Christ well. And last, look at verses 17 through 20. Jesus brings it all together here. Be obedient for Jesus. Verse 17, Jesus said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets." Jesus said, "I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus wants us to be salt. He wants us to be light. And most of all, He wants us to be obedient. Now, we'll flesh that out a little bit. We obediently follow the one who fulfills these Old Testament prophecies, Jesus. He's the one saying this. He's saying, I didn't come to tear that Old Testament up, that law, those prophecies that were made so long ago. I'm the answer to those prophecies. I'm the answer to that law. I fulfilled the law. And I'm going to go to the cross and do all that for you. Now, obviously, we're looking in retrospect here, but Jesus is saying, I am the answer to all those things you read about there. I'm not tearing them up. I'm the answer to them. I'm the fulfillment of them. In fact, Jesus wants us to know that these same scriptures carry authority with them. He's trying to emphasize these scriptures. Nothing He does is contrary to them. Now, to clarify two things, you may have seen two words there that were confusing. Iota and dot, right? What do those two things mean? Well, they're two of the smallest things you will see in Hebrew. Now, Hebrew is written much differently than English. It is very hard to study. I will tell you from personal experience. We write left to right. Hebrew is right to left. First difference. Hebrew does not have spaces. There's these little marks that signify a space or a comma or a period or a colon. It's totally different. And there's these little bitty marks that you will see that is sometimes called a jot or a tittle is another way to say iota and dot, depending on your translation. A jot is the smallest Hebrew letter. You'll barely see it. It's almost like an accent mark when you're writing in English. A dot is a tiny extension on a Hebrew letter. You'll barely see it written, but it was important to that culture when they were reading. These two smallest dots, these two smallest symbols, Jesus is saying, they're important. And I didn't come to destroy any of these things. The point is this. The Scriptures carry authority and should be obeyed. That's what Jesus is saying. Don't ignore the law. Don't ignore the prophets. I'm not coming to get rid of them. I'm fulfilling them. I'm doing them. I am the answer to the mystery that you long to know about. These are God's words for His people. Jesus says, don't say, because He knows there's some Pharisees out there. He's saying, don't say I'll do this one. I'll obey this one, but I won't do this one over here because this one rubs me wrong. He's saying, don't be a hypocrite when you see these things. Obey all of the Word. Obey all the Word. Here's what Jesus is getting at. He wants His disciples to grow deeper in the relationship with Him and the relationship with the Word. He wants them to grow in holiness. Some of our same goals we have in the church today is, I want to see you grow deeper in your love for Jesus. I want to see you grow deeper in your walk with Him as you put off sin and you put on more of what Christ calls us to here. This salt and light and obedience to Him. As you put more of that on, I want to see you grow deeper and more holy like Jesus was. This means that in order to obey the Word, we must know the Word. And in order to know the Word, we must read the Word. And when we read the Word, we must do this Word. We must do what it says. Now, maybe as you read it, that means you're going to listen to it, which is fine. Maybe it means you do take some time every day and read it. Maybe you use a book to guide you through a particular passage and walk through that as this person guides you through those passages. But most importantly, meditate on what you're reading and apply it to your life. Let me close with this. See, right here we're seeing Jesus say, be the salt and the light, and obey him by being those things. Well, a few chapters later, Jesus is going to say, go and make disciples of all nations. Go and be my disciples. Go and share this message with others. Disciples are supposed to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world as they live here on this world and in this community. We are to be salt and light. We are to obediently follow Christ. He has called us. He has called you to have an influence on others. So my challenge this week is this. First, be salt by letting your Christian worldview impact how you live this week. Let your Christian worldview come out as much as you think is possible. Stretch yourself. Let that be known to others. Maybe that you were a little timid about before, but let your influence be known. Second, be light by letting your Christian worldview impact how your testimony speaks to others. How are your good works towards others? How is your love for neighbor looking these days? And then third, be obedient to God's word by being in the word this week. Be light, be salt, and be obedient to the word as you live this Christian life. Now, I read that story earlier, and maybe that old retired person who was keeping that spring and that river clean, maybe he didn't seem like a big deal to those council people. Maybe he didn't seem like that role was such a big deal. Maybe he was skipping in the background, doing his work, and maybe he wasn't on the front lines of keeping, but his job was super important to that town, wasn't it? His job was vital to keeping that spring and those rivers all clean for that village in the Alps. You and I, we're not called to save the world. But what we are called to is to make a difference. Now, we can't do everything, as you know. We can't do everything, but we can do something. We can be salt. We can be light in our community, and we can obediently follow Jesus every day. Let us pray. Father, thank you today that as we open your word this morning, that we can see just the basics of what it means to be a Christian, the basics of what it means to live a Christian life, to be salt, to be light, just out of obedience to your word, to do those things in this world and to make whatever impact we can. And I pray for us this week as we consider how to apply these things, as we strive to make adjustments in how we live our life, and maybe there's more good works we need to do, or maybe there's more of an impact we can have, or maybe we just need to be more bold at times. I pray for strength. I pray that we will trust you. And most of all, I pray that you will help us to persevere as we